Hello, everyone, and welcome to ST Spooky Adventures podcast. Here we discuss everything paranormal. We are your hosts. I'm Janine Haynes.
And I'm Michelle Myers. In each episode, we will share our experiences, dive into paranormal lore, cover how to conduct investigations, plus bring you exciting guests.
So this week we're going to talk about cryptids. Michelle, what are your thoughts on Bigfoot? Is he real or is he fake?
I don't know. This is a tough one, Janine. I'll tell you, I've really been on the fence with this one. I've watched all those shows about, hunting Bigfoot. And I was always pretty skeptical until I really started diving into some of the research that we did. And I think my mind has changed. I think I'm pretty convinced that it's real, or at least they were in up until recent history. What about you?
I agree. Doing some of the research has kind of changed my mind a little bit. I also was on the fence. I did have some beliefs that they could exist, but also had that healthy skepticism. Some of the research that we did, including the stuff about Roosevelt, really kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, and do you want to share those findings with our audience?
Sure. So President Roosevelt was a big hunter, and he also wrote books about his excursions. And so I was actually looking into some of the stuff that he had written about a time that he was out hunting with an Indian group, experiences that they had, the things that they shared with him, and then his own personal experiences. The book is actually called, I have it here somewhere. So it was in the book called The Wilderness Hunter. I'll go ahead and link that book down in our description on YouTube for you all if you want to check it out. But it does go into great detail about scary experiences he had while out and hunting with these Indians.
Yeah, and what I found so compelling was that, you know, as recent as 100 years ago, or I guess around 100 years ago, a little bit more, uh, we really start seeing documented cases of people seeing, large, tall, hairy, man-like creatures, and really a lot of it stems around the gold rush era. In Northern California. Of course, we're in Southern California, but I've been up in that part of the country. I bet you have too, part of the state, I should say. And I've been to a lot of those, old gold mining towns that are still around. And this is what really convinced me, Janine, was that people were starting to actually document it and reports. And in each instant, it's not just one person reporting seeing one of these creatures, it's multiple people. There's one that I found really chilling. It was a case of several miners were staying in a cabin overnight. And this was an old cabin, very rickety. There was like large gaps between each of the logs, an old, very like kind of shack type thing. And they talk about these, they didn't have the term Bigfoot or Sasquatch, back then per se, but they talk about these creatures, circling their cabin, and even like climbing on the roof, reaching in. There's a story about one reaching through these gaps, trying to grab an axe from one of the guys. And of course, these guys were scared to death. And the next morning, they survived, but they, jump in a truck and drive away. So it was even that recent where they had, vehicles, and then other reports of like cavalry, and soldiers up in that part of the state, seeing these creatures, having one person see one, come back, get a group and go back, and they all witness it. So that again was the most compelling for me. Several eyewitnesses seeing the same thing. Because if it's one person, it could be whatever, a trick of the light, they saw a deer, whatever. But many people, and then coming back and writing it down in official records. To me, that really said something.
I definitely agree that those were some of the things that kind of really steered me towards, wow, this really could be real. Made a TV show, paranormal TV show, where they talked about Bigfoot. They were more into the ghost hunting aspect on the show, but they had to touch on these Bigfoot sightings because the miners did have such tangible experiences that they were able to share with other people. And then the fact, like you said, with the military and the cavalry, like they're not going to make fools out of themselves by saying that they saw something that they didn't really see. And the fact that these are groups of people that are having the same experiences is interesting to me, as well as with Roosevelt. The Indians, they were speaking a different language than he did, and he was kind of learning to communicate with them. But even when it was translated from their language to ours, the stories were quite similar, same words and adjectives used. So it was quite convincing.
Yeah, and I remember one report of a soldier that was interacting with the Native Americans, and he would talk about how they would explain that there were this group of beings uh, that they sort of had this agreement with. They would leave, fruit and food sort of at the edge of the forest for them, and then in turn, they would leave them alone. And there was another story that was really chilling where uh, two guys were going out, they were exploring. I think they were looking for some place to, I don't know, something with a gold rush, but they set up camp and there were two of them, and all night they saw something circling their camp. They described it as a very, very tall, man-like creature that stank really bad, but was making like grunting sounds and almost like howling sounds. And that one actually ended in tragedy where they split up at one point in the morning, went to go get their horses that they'd left a distance away, and the other to pack up the camp. And with the guy with the horses came back, he actually found his friend dismembered and left about. So, and then the one earlier I was talking about where the miners were surrounded in a cabin. They were being very, they were, these creatures were very, actually very aggressive. I think we don't think of them that way. The lore is they're very shy, they stay away from us. But so many of these stories, these accounts, talk about them as being very aggressive. So the whole other, perspective of it that I hadn't really thought of before either.
Yeah, definitely with those stories there, the dismemberment, the way they described it, it wasn't like it was an animal attack where they were mauled and scratched and bitten. It was just like limbs being ripped off and things being ripped
Yeah,
off, which was interesting to me.
dismemberment basically.
Right. Because another animal would, there'd be bite marks and scratch marks, right? But that didn't take place in that situation. And then the smell that these people are describing, it doesn't matter where the sightings takes place around the world. They say it smells like rotting flesh. And so for everybody to have that same experience is quite interesting to me as well.
Yeah, you raise a good point. There's so many similar stories throughout the world, so it seems like either whether they exist still today or they did up until recent history, it's like every continent has, almost every continent at least, has their own version of Bigfoot, whether it's Sasquatch, Yeti. I'm sure there's other terms I'm not even thinking of. Even on the East Coast, I remember living there and they would talk about like the Jersey Devil that would live in the forest. And it seemed to be something. And then even here in Southern California, we even have stories of the Proctor Valley, creature, similar type descriptions, walking the road. So I don't give that much credence. I think that's too recent, but I do think it's interesting. So, I think maybe they did exist and perhaps they've died out, like so many other creatures that have gone extinct. Competition, people, you know, humans taking over resources, encroaching on their environment. I mean, we've seen this time and time again. What do you think? Do you think they're still around, or do you think they're wiped out?
I mean, there's a possibility they could still be around. They're starting to find some, interesting animals that they believe were, or like I guess fish and stuff that they think were around during the prehistoric times. They're starting to find their bones as if they're starting to die off. But I do believe that if they probably are close to extinction. Humans tend to take whatever we want and do whatever we want. And so, with us taking up over the land and forcing even regular animals out of their natural habitat so that we can continue to build, I do feel like we're pushing them further out. We tend to also litter and do things that kind of contaminate the water and the food sources for some of these animals. So, not sure what exactly Yetis or Bigfoot would eat, but it's possible that they could be facing some of the same situations that we are currently forcing on other wildlife here. So I don't know. I mean, Proctor Valley Monster, meh. I've had my own experiences out there. I do think it's a very large mountain lion that's chasing people through that area. Probably not Bigfoot, but a lot of people do feel that that is Bigfoot out there or some kind of Yeti. I don't think that we have one here in San Diego currently, but around the world, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, maybe some other forested parts of the country. I mean, there's still a lot out there. I mean, we don't see it here in San Diego, but everything's built over.
Here in San Diego, if there's open space, they build something on it. So I really don't know that they would be able to, some of that big would be able to hide out here in San Diego.
I don't think so. Well, I definitely can't wait to research other cryptids and see if my mind has changed about those as well. And I'm definitely excited, Janine, for our next episode where we're going to share our paranormal investigation do's and don'ts. I know this is something you and I have talked about a lot. I think we're on the same page, and I can't wait to also see the comments that we get in after that one to see if people agree with our tips and what we do, or if they have some of their own. And Janine, as we wrap up, can you tell our listeners where they can find us?
Yes, so definitely you can find our videos as well as our podcast posted on SD Spooky Adventures YouTube channel, but you can also follow us on Facebook and TikTok, also under SD Spooky Adventures.
All right. Thank you, Janine, and thank you everyone for listening.
All right, thanks, Michelle. We'll see you all next time.